Hi, friends. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year coming up. We've got one of our dear friends, Andy Woods Ministries coming up. We're going to get a pastor's perspective on some of the top stories of 2024. Don't move.
Welcome to Worldview Matters, discussing controversial issues, discerning current events, defending biblical Christianity. No topic off limits. And now, here's your host, David Fiorazzo.
Hey, friends, thanks so much for tuning in, for praying, for sharing the podcast, and for remembering the reason for the season. We'll touch on that at the end of today's show with Andy Woods. AndyWoodsMinistries.org, one of my favorite Bible teachers and pastors, also president of Chafer Theological Seminary. Andy, welcome back to Worldview Matters. So good to see you, as always.
Yeah, David, good to be back. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. You've had a busy year, as most of us had, and lots going on. But before we get to some of the top stories, you've got a new book out. And the reason I want to talk a little bit about it today, we'll talk about it again in the coming year, is because we've got to keep fighting, friends. Just because there was a good result in the recent election with President Trump and more of America turning red, that's not going to stay that way, because remember, the biblical worldview of the left did not change. And Satan has not repented, and they're going to pull out all the stops and double down. So we've got to keep fighting. We've got to keep getting Christians engaged, and millions did not vote. So let's bring up your book, Andy. Thank you for writing it. It's over on Amazon, The Bible and Your Vote, Equipping the American Christian to Stand for Righteousness at the Ballot Box. So, Andy, we've talked a little bit about this, not about your book, but about this topic of Christian engagement for years. And it just seems like people need more information, more prodding to really do their responsibility, the due diligence every election. So in your book, first of all, you could have written this 10 years ago. You could have waited until the midterms, but you decided to get this out now. Just tell us about why you decided to write this and how you saw it was important.
Well, I did notice a lot of the woke type books trying to use the Bible to defend, leftism are now hitting the marketplace. And so I kind of felt like there was a need for a book that defends what actual Christianity teaches, not taking verses out of context.
Yes,
but
thank you.
And, I did a sermon series on this in 2016. It's not a series on Trump or Hillary or Kamala. There's no modern political personalities, mentioned in the book. But basically what it is the subtitle of it is Biblical Principles for Any Election, state, local, national. And I'm of the view that God has spoken in certain areas, and there are certain guidelines that he gives us in economics, foreign affairs, social issues, and a few other topics like that, where it's actually chapter and verse, where it's a thus saith the Lord. And I guess my heart is for Christians to, first of all, not just be registered to vote, but to actually vote. And when they do, they put on their biblical lenses in so doing. It's not voting based on party loyalty or, this is the way my parents voted or anything like that. It's a topical Bible study on what God has said on these issues. And my hope and prayer is that Christians will read it and they will take that mindset with them into the ballot box.
So over on Amazon, people can read it now. On Kindle, right? They can read it before Christmas. So if you guys are interested in doing that, The Bible and Your Vote is up and it's live on Amazon. I just want to mention a couple of the subcategories under economic issues. We've got ownership of private property. What else? How about opposition to runaway debt? That's a biblical principle. Social issues. We've got family as the building block to society, parental authority. What about public expressions of Christianity? Interesting. You talk about the environment, and you get into environmental stewardship and not earth worship. These are very important principles. And as you said, the left and their social justice agenda, I mean, they're pushing all kinds of woke ideologies that are not biblical. And as you say, they're very good at taking verses out of context. Foreign relations. So a lot of very important issues, friends. So you can check those out. We will have Andy back in the new year, and we're going to go through this a little bit more in depth. But anything you want to share on any one of these or about the book before we move into some of the top stories of 24?
I mean, well, the book just covers countless issues, but just taking one, probably the biggest issue in the past presidential election that we just emerged from is borders. I mean, most people are shocked to discover that God has spoken on the issue of borders. You know, God has a viewpoint, and it's not this kind of open borders, George Soros mentality that we get from the left. So that would be just one of many examples that we could talk about. Most Christians, when they talk about voting biblically, they usually are talking about abortion. Mm-hmm. And obviously that's a big deal, and God has spoken there. But what you'll discover is abortion, as important as an issue as that is, I mean, that's one of many issues that we should be thinking about when we go to the ballot box, borders being one, our attitude towards Israel being another, and we could just go right on down the list.
Well, let's talk about borders a little bit, Andy, because there may be some newer believers or some younger Christians that maybe aren't as familiar with the Old Testament. I mean, God mapped out borders, expanded borders for Israel. They're not even, occupying a fraction of that land now. Speak to that for a moment, because that's in the Old Testament.
Yeah, it's Paul on Mars Hill talked about, the boundaries of humanity's habitation.
Yeah.
And I was listening to one of our woke pastors saying, well, that just means God is in favor of people traversing, open borders. And that passage isn't talking about that at all. What it's talking about is God ordained the nation state at the Tower of Babel. That's God's design, that the world, before he comes back, would not be governed by global governance, but individual nations. And what do you have to have a nation? You've got to have a common language, a common culture, a common currency, and you have to have enforceable borders. I mean, not having enforceable borders is like calling me, the owner of my home and family, leader of my family, when anyone under any circumstances unvetted can enter my home without my knowledge. Now, you can call me a lot of things, but don't call me a homeowner or the leader of my family if anybody can sneak in through the back door without being vetted by me by going through the front door. And that's just a common sense thing, but that's a Bible thing. And so when I'm thinking borders, I'm thinking Bible. I'm not thinking Republican, Democrat, or all of these other, what the latest mean tweet of the day was or whatever. I mean, I'm basically thinking Scripture. And as you read this book, you'll discover you can do that, not just in the area of borders, but a plethora of issues. And I'm afraid these are the things that people, particularly Christians, aren't thinking about, when the fact of the matter is God has spoken in these areas. And if we're going to have the mind of Christ, it includes how we vote at the ballot box.
Amen. Brother, thank you. Such an important book. And that's why we'll be talking more about this, because midterms are not too far off. And no. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. But so what do you think? I think borders was one of the key issues that drove the red wave, so to speak. What are your thoughts? What else other than borders do you think helped that election that Trump got reelected?
Well, I think the American people got a taste of what socialism is like in the last 4 years,
and Marxism,
and learning about socialism and Marxism from a book is completely different than living under it. And inflation is a universal language. Everybody understands inflation. That you go to the store and things are not as affordable as they once were. And so I think people got a glance of how the current economic policies of just rampant government spending, too much money chasing too few goods, which is the definition of inflation, is not healthy. It's not good for families. It's not good for your mental or emotional state. And that, in addition to borders, in addition to crime, in addition to countless other issues, in addition to sending your kids to a public school and to discover that they've been transgendered without parental knowledge or insight, and then complaining about it at a school board meeting makes you, under the FBI or Department of Homeland Security, some kind of domestic terrorist. Members of the Catholic Church being targeted by the FBI. I think people just got a taste of this, what it's really like to live in a big government socialist / communist country, and they don't want anything to do with it. And they saw that Kamala's father was an open Marxist. She definitely had Marxist tendencies, and I think people just reacted against it, and that's why we saw the not just the win in the popular vote, which was wonderful in and of itself, but the electoral landslide that we saw.
You're too kind, Pastor Andy Woods. Marxist tendencies.
Yeah.
Kamala. Oh, my goodness. Because I remember reading about what she did as the AG in California. And even during, was it Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation riots, that she was bailing out convicted felons with the Minneapolis Freedom Fund. But anyway, we learned a lot. And thank you so much, America, for pointing us in the right direction. But we can't assume that it's going to stay this way. That's why we wanted to talk about some of these things. So, Andy, we've got also issues with fentanyl and other things. It's not just crime. It's not just human trafficking and but fentanyl. I don't think people realize how that is not only spreading across the border in the big cities. I mean, people are affected in small towns because drugs spread very quickly. Can you speak to that for a moment before we get to the next topic?
Yeah, it's
because you're in
country.
Texas.
Sure. I mean, I'm close to the border. I'm here in Houston.
Yeah.
And you'll notice the border towns went incredibly red this time around in Texas. So they got a taste of what open borders looks like, with crime, drugs, other countries just dumping their prisons and criminals into our country. And they're still coming in, by the way, under the current administration. People coming in, we have no idea who they are, why they're here, what their motives are. And you can sit in a classroom and make arguments for this stuff, but it's a totally different thing living under it. I remember back before the Berlin Wall fell down, I was playing basketball for our college team, and they took us from West Berlin into East Berlin. And I saw communism firsthand, what it's like. I saw the poverty. I saw the general despair in people's lives. I saw you go into a restaurant and there's like 2 things to order from, if that. And the people running the restaurant could care less if you're there or not, because they're getting paid through the state. So there's no incentive, to work hard. I saw cars broken down and unrepaired still from World War II.
Jeez.
And I could sit in front of some professor wax eloquently about communism, but it's a completely different thing when you visit a communist country. And I think that's what happened in the United States. It's like God said, okay, if you want to go this direction, let me give you a little foretaste of what it's going to be like. And we saw the prices of things go up, and the government doing crazy things, and people just didn't want it, and they reacted against it.
Yeah. We saw communist policy in America and the weaponization of the federal government's agencies against their political enemies, meaning Christians, conservatives, Republicans. Andy, what would one more big story be take away from 2024 that you thought that's pretty insightful, whether it's from the Christian perspective or otherwise, just something you thought, man, that's going to go down in history in 2024 as a pretty big development? Anything?
Well, I thought this explosion, and I know some of it started October 7th, 2023, but I saw it picking up in 2024. Just this explosion of anti-Semitism on our university campuses, of just mobs of people chanting from the river to the sea, meaning Jordan to Mediterranean, the land of Palestine, a false name, go into that in the book, by the way. The land of Palestine will be free, meaning we want to get rid of the Jewish presence, meaning we want to get rid of Israel, is what they're saying.
Yeah.
And I remember Mark Lamont Hill, a commentator for either CNN or MSNBC, one of those, maybe, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5, 6 years ago, used that expression, from the river to the sea, and he lost his job just like that. It was considered to be too anti-Semitic and too extreme. I mean, even for MSNBC or CNN, which is a real accomplishment to get kicked off those networks. Well, now they just chant it with regularity. Yep. And you have a university professor standing up and saying he experienced exhilaration when the October 7th massacre happened from Gaza, which was really per capita Israel's 9/11 when you think about it, and just how this anti-Semitic thought, has become part of our culture now. And that was, to me, a big development in 2024.
Huge. Yeah, anti-Semitism, prophetic, scriptural, right? But not
Absolutely.
Disappointing, very disappointing, especially in America. But we've got to take a brief pause with Dr. Andy Woods, and you can get more information on his website, andywoodsministries.org. Remember to check out the book, The Bible and Your Vote. We'll be talking about that book continually into the new year, but we'll be right back on Worldview Matters.
Introducing Patriot Mobile, the wireless carrier that stands with you. We are committed to supporting the values that make our nation great. With affordable plans and reliable nationwide coverage, Patriot Mobile is not just a wireless service. It's a call to action for those who believe in the American dream.
Get free activation now with promo code DAVID. Hey friends, a couple more days of our winter fundraiser. We're raising money for the next 6 months of production costs on Worldview Matters, and we would love, obviously, your prayers, but if you can contribute financially, that would be awesome. For those able to give a one-time gift of $200 or more, or just $200, or a recurring gift of $25 a month, we'd love to send you a brand new commemorative rose gold pen set branded with Worldview Matters. Also, first-time donors get our mug, Worldview Matters, and my tagline on the backside, keep speaking the truth about things that matter. Make your tax-deductible gift or donation at worldviewmatters.tv. Andy Woods is with us today. A lot to talk about, big stories from 2024. Before we get into this very interesting one that you pulled up from the Times of Israel, Andy, is there one other story that you think maybe it's prophetic, it involves the church, maybe the election, whatever you think is one that's a takeaway from 2024? What would that be?
Well, the other big one is the sovereignty of the United States just being given away by the Biden administration.
I don't think people realize the details of
that.
that.
Yeah, at the United Nations meeting, what was it, in September? And basically, it's if there's an emergency of some kind as deemed by the World Health Organization, which I sometimes call the World Homicide Organization, but the World Health Organization, then the World Health Organization takes over. I mean, they take over information, they take over travel, they take over what can be put into your body. And it's interesting that we never voted on this as a treaty. Article 2, Section 2, I think it's Clause 2, right in there in our Constitution says a president can't enter into a treaty unless 2/3 of the majority of the senators present, ratify what he has done.
That's right.
So they just called it something other than a treaty. They called it an agreement, an accord,
Wow.
something like that. And there was the Biden administration with countless other countries just giving the World Health Organization jurisdiction over the United States. And so I think that's big prophetically because of what the Bible predicts about world government in the last days.
Yeah. In America, what's going to happen to America? We know everyone's going to turn against Israel at some point, and that's sad because we've been an ally for so long. So, Andy, before we run out of time, I want to get to this story that you shared in your pastor's point of view, one of them recently. And that is is this a change in Trump's approach? The headline is, "I support whatever gets us to peace. Trump avoids backing his 2020 two-state solution offer." And the article says, briefly, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump refrains from explicitly backing a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, asserting that he'll support whatever framework brings peace. Your thoughts on this, Andy? I think that's a big story.
Yeah, to me, it's music to my ears because by my way of thinking, Trump was a two-state solution guy in his first term.
Yeah.
And almost the moment, and there's ministries like Bill Koenig and others that document this very carefully, almost to the moment where he put that map up on his Twitter feed, or White House, also on the White House website, that had Israel sort of carved up, and went this two-state solution direction, is almost to the moment everything started to go sideways for him. I mean, remember, David, the economy was roaring.
Yes.
Trump was headed for re-election. And then all of a sudden that happened, and everything that we know about from 2020 in hindsight happened as well. You know, the virus, the masks, the shutdown of the economy, the this, that, the the election issues that were brewing, you remember, in 2020. I mean, all of that happened post him moving in this "let's carve up Israel" two-state solution mentality. That's what the two-state solution is. It's trying to take Judea and Samaria and take it away from the Israelis, which they won in a war of self-defense, 1967, fairly, and give it to the so-called Palestinians. And the world thinks if Israel did that, it would bring peace to the region. So that was the Trump mindset. And then this time around, when Trump was reelected, I kind of got disheartened because he put a guy named, I think his name's Boulos, if I've got the name right, into his cabinet, who's also a two-state solution guy. So I was like, well, here we go again. You know, he's learned nothing. But then I saw the article that you're referencing there, where he says, we're going to try to achieve peace in the Middle East, and the two-state solution is not the only option. There's other options. And I said to myself, well, there it is. He's learned his lesson. He's moved away from his 2016 to 2020 mentality. And I think this bodes well for our nation, because God's word is very clear that he promises to curse those who curse Israel and bless those who bless Israel. I don't see any statute of limitations on that passage in Genesis 12, verse 3. I think it's binding today. And so I was very heartened to read that article that you're referring to.
Yes, and here's the guy that moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. You know? Fascinating.
Yeah, Donald Trump probably did more for Israel than all other presidents combined that I can think of. Yeah. He allowed annexation of the Golan Heights at that time. He moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of undivided Israel. Yeah. And things were just roaring along just great for him until he brought forth the deal of the century. And I would encourage people to do their own research. You'll see that things started to disintegrate for him the moment that happened. By the way, almost the exact same thing happened to George Herbert Walker Bush in 1992, when he had emerged from the Gulf War as a victor with 90% approval ratings.
Wow.
And he was roaring to re-election, and then he moved into this two-state solution mentality. He started to pressure the Israelis to give up land, I think at the Madrid conference. And that's when his whole candidacy started to disintegrate, and his constituency was divided between the Republicans, and a guy named Ross Perot came along.
Oh, gosh.
And took the conservative vote and divided it, giving the presidency to a guy named Bill Clinton, who then went on to become a two-term president. And I'm of the view that because Bush tried to divide Israel, God said, I'm going to divide your constituency. And
Wow.
so what happened to Bush, I think, is what happened to Trump in his first term.
Hmm.
With Trump, I think he's learned his lesson, or somebody's in his ear, maybe Michelle Bachmann or somebody like that that can explain these things to him. And so when I saw his change of position on the two-state solution, I became very encouraged by that.
Yeah, the timing is really interesting, and it indicates that there must be a sovereign God above
Amen.
all things that that's governing the universe. Andy, we just have 2 minutes left or so. If there was one other story that you thought maybe you think we should be watching. I mean, we hear this about drones, about AI, about all kinds of stuff, mark of the beast technology. What would be one thing that you would keep an eye on as we go into 2025 now?
Well, one of the things that happened in 2024 recently that I think is going to accelerate is this International Criminal Court
Hmm.
issuing an arrest warrant for Netanyahu and
Interesting.
Gallant. In other words, if those guys travel to, 121 different signatories to the International Criminal Court, they could be arrested. So what that shows me, and arrested for what?
Yeah.
What are they doing that's so bad? Well, they're clearing out Hamas out of Gaza so that another October 7th, 2023, won't happen again. And I guess that's an international crime. So in the minds of the globalists, and so the International Criminal Court issues an arrest warrant for that.
Hmm.
And what I'm seeing come into existence is global governance that's anti-Israel, anti-Semitic at its core, which I think is an outworking of Daniel 7 and other passages. And so I expect that kind of trend to accelerate into the new year.
Interesting. We'll keep an eye on that. Man, I wish we had several hours with you, but that just means we have to have you back again, Andy.
Okay.
We've been doing
back.
this for a while. I remember, I think we first connected about 5-6 years ago. Maybe. I think it was when the Middle East Meltdown. What year did that book come out that you wrote?
Yeah, we're back now to 2016, right in there.
Yep, I remember that came out, and I talked to you on a Christian talk show. I still love that book, and that's very relevant today. The Middle East Meltdown by Andy Wood. So, brother, thank you for your voice and all the work you do. May God enlarge your territory, keep you healthy, protect you and your family, and you, sir, have a Merry Christmas. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. Merry Christmas to you and yours, and Happy New Year.
Thank you so much, Andy. All right, guys, and remember, we will have him back to do a much more of a thorough show on his book, The Bible and Your Vote, Biblical Principles for Any Election, because we will continue to have elections, hopefully free and fair elections in America. But Merry Christmas, friends. God bless you, and as always, keep speaking the truth about things that matter. See you soon.